The Sony PlayStation is one of the most interesting consoles of all time, especially when you look at how it came to be. It was originally designed for the Super Nintendo as a CD add-on to the system to help Nintendo compete against Sega and of course the Sega CD. But negotiations fell through between Nintendo and Sony pretty much at the last minute. There's actually a working Nintendo PlayStation prototype out there now, but Nintendo ended up going and working with Philips and the CDI instead, and never brought CD technology to the Super Nintendo. In light of this, Sony ended up just creating their own system called the PlayStation, and it was a pretty revolutionary system using CDs that could provide CD quality music, full motion video, and a pretty powerful engine that would allow for 3D games to really start to flourish during this time period. So today on Hardware Pushers, we're going to look at the PlayStation 1. We're going to look at the games that I feel really helped push the hardware to its limits. So sit back, relax, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, of course, and let's enjoy this episode of Hardware Pushers. The first game we have to talk about is arguably one of the greatest games on the PS1 and in general of all time, Metal Gear Solid. Metal Gear started originally on the MSX computer system with 2 entries, but the series didn't get notoriety in the US until the PS1 release of Metal Gear Solid. Playing as Solid Snake as he infiltrates Shadow Moses Island, Metal Gear Solid was a hardware pusher for a many number of reasons. Obviously, the first thing you notice are the visuals in the game, which featured a high polygon count and very smooth frame rate. The storytelling was unlike anything that was seen at the time as well, with Hideo Kojima crafting a narrative that rivals the best Hollywood movies. Another reason the game was a hardware pusher for the PS1 was the audio, ranging from full voice acting with high quality voiceover work, tons of dialogue, and realistic gunfire sounds. You have to remember, this is the same console that featured the cheesy voice acting of Resident Evil, so Metal Gear Solid was a huge step for gaming in general terms of presentation and storytelling. Racing games are one of the oldest genres in gaming, usually taking a fast-paced arcade style of gameplay. Racing simulations weren't really a thing until Gran Turismo came along. While the first entry was solid, Gran Turismo 2 was a true hardware pusher and helped create the racing simulation genre as well. Featuring a ton of real-life and prototype cars, Gran Turismo 2 featured realistic specs on every car model included within the game. You could also tinker with everything from engine swaps to gear ratios, which was amazing at the time. Boasting a roster of nearly 650 cars, you would think that the game would have to sacrifice presentation in order to put all of this vehicle information in the game, but surprisingly it didn't. If anything, Gran Turismo 2 is one of the finest looking PS1 racing games, with a buttery smooth frame rate, highly detailed and accurate car models, and a wide variety of tracks, including both day and night tracks. While in general the Sega Saturn was considered the 2D powerhouse machine, the PS1 still managed to have what is arguably one of the best 2D games ever, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Symphony of the Night was the first Castlevania game to deviate from the normal level progression, instead putting you inside of a massive castle in which you could explore at your leisure. The style of gameplay is now known as Metroidvania, combining Castlevania-style gameplay but having the free roam aspect of Metroid, with areas blocked off unless you have a certain weapon type or key to access them. Symphony of the Night featured gorgeous 2D sprite work, a fluid animation style, and fantastically arranged music pieces that are some of the most memorable in gaming history, and helped push the 2D aspects of the PS1 to show that it could compete with the Saturn in this regard. Capcom released a ton of fantastic games on the PS1, with games like the Resident Evil franchise getting their start on the platform. Dino Crisis was a spin-off of this franchise, with the first title essentially being a Resident Evil clone, but with dinosaurs. Dino Crisis 2 deviated a bit from this, ditching the slower-paced action of Resident Evil and the first Dino Crisis game, and instead focusing more on the action elements. Because of this, the gameplay was much faster paced, and made for a much more pick-up-and-play style of game. Dino Crisis 2 makes this list of hardware pushers simply because of the graphics, which boast a great variety of colors, detailed pre-rendered environments, and fantastic character models on both the player and the dinosaurs. Some of the dinosaurs in this game are simply massive and have outstanding animation, along with some pretty in-depth artificial intelligence, making them feel like a much bigger threat than a simple slow plodding zombie. If you watched my Sega Saturn Hardware Pushers episode, you may remember me talking about the port that should have never happened, Quake on the Saturn. While the original Quake never managed to come to the PS1, the sequel, Quake II, did, and is one of the most visually striking first-person shooter games on the PS1. Whereas the N64 version of the game had the luxury of using the expansion pack to enhance things, the PS1 used the CD technology to its full potential, with fantastic music and full motion video sequences. Graphically, the game is a bit stripped down compared to the N64 version, but the 32-bit powerhouse of the PS1 does have a distinct advantage of offering a much more crisp visual style instead of the muddier polygons featured on the N64 version. Considering the fact that the N64 was technically twice as powerful in terms of raw power, the PS1 port being as good as it is makes it a true hardware pusher. The PS1 was an RPG machine with tons of high-quality role-playing games from companies like Squaresoft, who abandoned their previous partnership with Nintendo due to the N64 sticking with cartridges instead of moving on to CDs instead. As a result of this, one of the biggest RPG franchises moved to the PlayStation brand, Final Fantasy. While Final Fantasy VII is the more popular game, in terms of pushing the hardware of the PS1, I give the nod to Final Fantasy VIII. Final Fantasy VIII had a more impressive visual style, I felt, with brighter and richer colors, more realistic character models, and impressive scrolling techniques that made the world feel very alive at the time. Each area had a distinct feeling, and the game was so massive it spanned 4 discs, filling each disc to the brim with fantastic visuals and audio. .3D fighting games were pretty popular on the PS1, and one game that managed to stand the test of time in pushing the PS1 hardware was Tekken III. Tekken 3 built upon the previous Tekken games but added much more content. Boasting a bigger roster, Tekken 3 also added a ton of new animations and more fluid gameplay, including the ability to step in and out of the background at the touch of a button. Tekken 3 looked amazing at the time of the release, and still looks impressive today honestly, with animations flowing seamlessly and character models looking refined and highly detailed. The PS1 version of Tekken 3 included more characters and modes than the arcade version as well, making it arguably the best fighting game on the PS1 and a technical marvel fitting on only one single disc. And those are just a handful of games that I feel push the PlayStation 1 to its limits. Now, as usual, as with hidden gems videos and hardware pushers, I did leave some games off purposefully because I do like the ability to go back and look at these systems again in the future. So if you feel like I missed the game, more than likely I knew about it. It just made the cutting room floor for this episode and probably will be featured in a future hardware pushers episode when I revisit this system. Now, with that being said, I would like to hear what games you think really helped push the PS1 in terms of hardware in the comments section down below, and of course what you think about this list. And thank you for watching this video. Make sure you check out other hardware pusher episodes if you enjoyed this video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and I will catch you guys next time. Later.